what was the answer to that first question?
No, folks will not have to check in at the kiosk for the holiday shop or the resident Christmas party. Okay, and I would like to introduce Judy Wiedemann to introduce our speaker today. Thank you, Judy.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Don Vidler, who is co-owner with his cousin Cliff DeFlyer of Vidler's, the world's greatest 5 and 10 cent store. Vidler's was founded in 1930 by Don's grandfather, Robert S. Vidler. You will all have a delightful time hearing Don's history of Vidler's, the world's greatest 5 and 10.
Thank you, Judy. I did not take it to say that. I'm a little bit flattered and also very frightened. I talk to big crowds, but this is one of the biggest. And I'd like to talk about the store and the history. Once I get going, I tend to speak fast, so please tell me to slow down. Ask if you have any questions. There'll be a little bit of history, some mystery, a smidgen of romance, and some drama in this presentation. And I won't spend a lot of time on facts and figures. I'm going to talk more about really my granddad and how the store, when he was a kid, how it started going all the way through. And we've heard about the Christmas movies and Bob and Ed and all that stuff, so I'll touch upon that briefly. The most important question of the morning, is there anybody in this room that has never been inside the Vidler's store? All right. You 3 or 4 is a 3-hour presentation. After this, the rest of you just went down to 45 minutes. And it's also, I know a lot of people there. Mrs. Reedy, I see my classmate Karen, her daughter is here, Ann Floyd, Peg Fletcher, so it's nice, it's like preaching to the choir. You probably know all the answers to this right away anyhow. So I'll start with, without further ado, I've been told this is going to work, the advancer of the slide. I'm paraphrasing here, I'm dating myself, but in the early 70s, a best-selling national New York Times book. I'm borrowing from them everything you always want to know about Vidler's, but we're afraid to ask. This is the first trivia question of the day. If you can see the little red star and the little guy in the front, that's my grandfather, Robert S. Vidler. Now here's a trivia question. What doesn't belong and why? Rye, England, Wheatland, Wyoming, East Aurora, or Lackawanna? What doesn't belong or why?
Lackawanna.
Nope, Lackawanna belongs.
Yeah. Wyoming.
Nope, Wyoming belongs.
Oh.
East Aurora. East Aurora doesn't belong. Despite the fact that everyone thinks my grandfather Bob and I were born in the basement of the store, no Vidler was ever technically born in East Aurora. Bev and I were born in Lackawanna at OLD, and I'll talk about Granddad was actually, the family was from England. And there were 13 kids in the family. He was one of the youngest. They migrated over here in the 1880s. Granddad was one of the 4 youngest born in the U.S., but he was born in Kansas, actually. It was a large family. Their father in the middle there, the guy with the beard, my great-grandfather, he was a merchant marine. And from what we hear stories afterwards, he wasn't the best husband or father. He basically took off on his sea journeys, would come back every few months, check in with the family. And unfortunately for him, or for my family, their mother died at a very young age. She was only 45 when she died after having 13 kids and a husband who wasn't around much. And after she died, they fell on pretty poor times. They went to Kansas because my great-grandfather had a brother there. And then they moved to Boston because they wanted to be near, they were from England near the seashore, so they wanted to be near the water. But after the mother died, the older sisters basically took care of the younger kids. And Granddad always kept journals and diaries, and he didn't speak highly of his own father. He just appeared over the years, but didn't have much part of the family. When he was 14 years old, because the older sisters, they couldn't afford him, they said, we're going to send you out to your rich uncle Reese Vidler, who lived in Colorado on Lookout Mountain. And according to the family, he had made his fortune in mining and in mountaineering out there. And this killed me today. He was 14 years old. They put him on a train in Boston and sent him out to Denver. Before smartphones, before computers, before planes, and just said, let us know when you get there. So he took the train, wrote a letter back, arrived at Uncle Reese's, I'm here. And he went to live with this family that was supposedly well-to-do Vidlers. Well, right when Granddad got out there, Uncle Reese's fortunes, there was a depression in the mining in the industry out there. So Granddad basically became the indentured servant to his uncle. He wrote in his diaries how he had to go into town and beg for on credit, on debt to get groceries for the family. And it was one thing he never growing up, and my dad had the same adage, and my uncle and Granddad, don't go into debt. He swore he'd never go into debt like his uncle had. So he's always paying off his bills and taking care of things. This picture, that's Granddad on his horse, and this is after he moved away, but went back. And why is the Coors there? He lived in Lookout Mountain, which is above Golden, Colorado. And one of his diaries, he always talks about seeing the little German beer maker walking into town. So he knew he didn't know them well, but he knew who the Coors family was. Two things, I mentioned how he didn't want to be in debt, and also we found out years later that he's kind of a gambler. He was a pool shark, he was a good poker player. He taught me how to play poker, he told me never to bet. And one time I came up joyously one weekend and told him, Granddad, I just want a quarter off Larry Cook, a neighbor. And he said, that's it, I told you not to bet, we're never playing cards again. We never did. So he was kind of strict in that regard. But after being in Colorado, when he was a young man, he moved to Wyoming. And he got a job in the oil field. It was actually a standard oil field in Wheatland, Wyoming. And that's where he started working, not as a roustabout or an oil driller, but he ran a company store, appropriately enough. There was a commissary there. He did a good job. He had a lot of innovative things for an oil store out in the middle of Wyoming, but he did a good job. He was making money at the store. And that is Gordis White Vidler, his wife, my grandmother. She grew up in East Aurora. And actually, Grammy's father was one of the first printers for Albert Hubbard. And she had gone out there on a train with one of her sisters. They were going to be teachers and explore the Wild West. And according to the legend, they had a stop off in Wheatland, Wyoming. All the oil guys would come down to see who the women were getting off the train. Granddad saw her and said, that's the one I'm going to marry. And 4 months later, they got married. So they spent their initial married lives out in a dusty oil field in Wyoming. That's the first known picture of Bob and Annette. That's Bob on the left, and that's Dad on the right, and they were both born in Wheatland, Wyoming. So Uncle Bob was there about 3 or 4 years. Dad was that much younger. He was only there about a year. Granddad, as I mentioned, ran the oil store, or the commissary for the oil company. He did a good job. They were doing well. They were profitable, and Standard Oil sent one of the big managers out there to see how the store was doing, who was running it. And Granddad said his supervisor came in, took full credit for everything, didn't even introduce him, and left it at that. And Granddad, on his principles, so I'm not working with this guy anymore, and quit. Granny, in the meantime, wanted to get back home to East Aurora. So they slopped back to Western New York. This is the car they used. This I had to look up. This one fact is that Granddad noted they spent $16.91 on gas from Wyoming back to East Aurora. It was a big trip. When he got back here, he thought he could get a job with Standard Oil in Buffalo, and they said, no thanks, we're good. He started other businesses, and believe it or not, at that time, he was like 38, 39 years old. Age discrimination existed back then. They said, you're too old, we don't need you. He briefly ran a gas station in Hamburg, and then the inspiration, according to the family legend, his mother-in-law said one day, it's a real pain in East Aurora. I can't buy thread or notions locally. I got to go all the way into Buffalo. And so he said, well, I ran a store. I can maybe do this. So he thought, I'm going to start my own business. Does anybody know why it was called the Fair Store? That's the original name of the store when he opened in 1930. Any guesses?
Fair prices.
That's what we thought, fair prices, fair competition, fair merchandise. One of the main reasons was his older English-British sisters said, you're opening, the economy's already tanking. This was in June of 1930. It was going to become the Great Depression. The times are already bad. They said, you're going to stay in our family name and reputation forever because we'll be out of business soon. Don't use their name. So he called it the Fair Store. And for years, my dad too, we always thought it was because of fair prices, fair merchandise. In Golden, Colorado, I found out there was a little 5 and dime called the Fair 5 and 10. And we think he probably, he grew up as a young kid there, so that's maybe where he got the name from. I'm not positive about that, but that's what we think. So he opened in June of 1930. The store, as if you see there, it's in between the two cars. Max Cadets, a lot of you might remember Max Cadets was next door to us. Kelsey's Jeweler, Mr. Kelsey was there. Kelsey's Jeweler was still there. But the store then was literally just the first 2 aisles. You know where the candy counter is? It was that aisle and the aisle right next to it. And if you just walked down to the cash register, that's where it ended. So it was only about 900 square feet. And Granddad, his wife, and they had one other employee working there at the time. Now, I'm sure a lot of you remember 5 and 10s were ubiquitous all over the U.S. then. Woolworths, that was the granddaddy of all the 5 and dimes, and everyone kind of followed whatever Woolworth did, all the other guys did. But I think virtually every city, every small town had a 5 and dime pretty much. Some were independent, locally owned, some became part of big chains. Anyone know the Knox family originally made their fortune started with 5 and 10 cent stores? And that's in Buffalo. And Knox was actually a first cousin of Frank Woolworth. And for a guy that became a millionaire, when a million meant something back in the 1900s, Woolworth was very generous. And most of his original employees were friends, family, cousins. And Knox was the first cousin, and he said to him, you know, I'm doing pretty good with this 5 and 10 thing, maybe you should start some stores. So Knox had actually his own very successful chain of Knox 5 and dimes. Most of them were in the Midwest, Pennsylvania. There weren't a lot. There was one in Buffalo, obviously. And that's actually, you can see this picture out of Knox Farm State Park. In one of the little outbuildings, they have the history of the family. But that is when Woolworths Incorporated, they brought, Knox is on the left there sitting. They brought in Knox, became part of the Woolworth empire. There's other guys who are either cousins or friends from Woolworth growing up. And that's when Woolworth really became an empire. Wait, I tell kids today, before Amazon, before Walmart, before Target, Woolworths was a store. At their peak, they had over 4,000 stores across the world. Nice news if you're from the Rochester area, that was a chain that's pretty well known in Rochester. Anybody know what Cresby's 5 and 10 became? Kmart. Yeah. And Kmart's pretty much gone now. I think they just announced recently the last standing Kmart closed. There might be one in Florida someplace. Walton's 5 and 10, you know what that became? Walmart. You know what the ratio of Walmarts is to Vidlers today? About 10,600 Walmarts and 1 Vidlers. And one day, I was telling Dad, I'm unloading a truck, and while he was still at the store, and I said, you know, Dad, the Walmart family, they're generational billionaires. None of the current family has ever been inside the store. They don't shop there. Where did we go wrong? He looked at me and smiled. He goes, you're a lot happier, aren't you? Yeah, because I'm unloading a truck and cleaning up in aisle 7, some kid's mess. This is Granddad at the end, well, like 1946, 47. So at that time, he was successful enough. You know, he figured, I've been doing this 15 years, the store's going to make it. He renamed it Vidlers. I think in town, people called it Vidlers. They called it Vidlers Fair Store. But he officially renamed it Vidlers. And I call this the Al Capone and Frank Nitti shot of my dad and uncle. And they joined the business in the late 40s. Uncle Bob, after he got out of the Navy, Dad went to U of R, RIT, and was a retailing major, appropriately enough. But that's how they used to dress every day going to work. They wore suits and ties. They wore their fedoras. They had the hats. And that's how they shoveled the snow, too. So they both started there in the late 40s. And that's what the store looked like. And for those of you who grew up around East Aurora, I mean, Vidlers was just the local 5 and 10. You went there to get shoelaces or a can or something. It wasn't the regional draw. It wasn't a destination point. It was just the local 5 and 10. And that's what most of the 5 and 10s around the country were like, except for the big chains. Does anybody remember there's a Ben Franklin in East Aurora? That was a 5 and 10. There was Gannon's 5 and 10 that opened up in the 50s. So they were both on the same side of the street with us, just one block down either way. So there were 3 5 and 10s within about 300 yards of each other. This is the interior of the store, and I know that's actually, the top left would be where the candy counter is today. And I think that's my granddad on the right. We had transom windows, so it was much brighter then, but that was the store from about when he opened it until the early 50s, was that size. They put on some additions of their own, but the store pretty much from the 1950s up until the early 80s was the same size. And most of you might remember, you know, you had the main floor, the wooden floors of the toys and games, then downstairs where your housewares and kitchen stuff was. Remember when Grants came to East Aurora? We thought that would be the death knell for our store. Grant's also, at that time, they were one of the largest expanding variety stores in the U.S. They came into they're the anchor store for the Plaza when it opened in 1960. Within about a year, both Gannon's and Ben Franklin went out of business. We struggled for a while. I mean, the Vidlers, I know Dad tells stories in the 60s, a lot of long hours and then trying to make things work. But we weren't real sure if they're going to make it through that. I don't remember because I was a kid then, but they kept it happy at home, but I know it's some tough times. I don't really need the notes, so just to be sure. So in the 60s, going back to Frank Woolworth didn't believe in advertising. He thought it was a waste of money. He maybe did a few circulars at the holidays, but he believed in using your front windows as your best form of advertising. And since he was the grandfather and all, that's what all the other 5 lieutenants did. We never did any advertising, very little. But when Grants came to town, we realized, all right, we may have to start something. So this started the quirky Vidler humor. This is in the shopping guide. They started doing weekly ads in the shopping guide. I think my dad was responsible for a lot of them. The other thing he started doing was using local kids in advertising. And and this I love. This is from the front page or the back page of the shopping guide. That's a good friend of mine from high school, Leslie Mail. Leslie Wade, her dad, Dr. Mail, was an optometrist. But not only is she in the ad, but they very nicely put her home address, her full name, where she lives. And they did that with every single ad. It was just different times, but they had every kid's name and where they lived. I did ask Leslie if I had permission to show this, and she was okay. So in the 60s, we were kind of getting a little tough, but Dad was starting to do that local advertising. And then we kind of got lucky. Rich Jennings, remember that name? Rich was a well-known, nationally known artist, watercolorist, but also he's a graphic artist, his profession, and they were good family friends, my dad and mom. And Rich said that you should really play up the old 5 and 10, the gilded signs, the red and white lines. That's what your calling card is. And so Rich designed what the storefront as we know it is today. So this is just one of the shots of him working. And that was real gold leaf lettering, which we still do. That the gold leaf lettering you see in the stores. It's a pretty fascinating process to watch. They literally take little square sheets of gold leaf and kind of paste it on or brush it on. So that's the store in the early 70s, and I wish it was in color, but that's after Rich Jennings had done his work. So that's the gilded sign, the red and white. I think through the 50s and early 60s, our awning might have been green and white, it might have been solid green. It was never red and white until the early 70s. And that's really when the store started to become more of a regional card. My dad started playing up, calling up bus companies, talking about the old 5 and dime, come to the store, see the store. So very slowly in the early 70s, people started coming around to visit Vidlers. This is when opportunity struck, 1980. You all know who that is, Peter Graves. Well, Mission Impossible at that time, way before Tom Cruise, again I tell the children today, way before Tom Cruise in the movies, Peter Graves was a huge star, and Mission Impossible was a big hit on TV in the 70s, and he was the star of the show. He was also, at that time, Liberty Bank, remember that? That was on the corner where the Bank of America was, and now that's gone. But Liberty Bank, he was their spokesperson, and they were doing a series of regional ads they called Good Partners. And that happened to be the bank for us, and they called up and said, could we have Mr. Graves come, could we shoot a spot in your store? Then my family said, sure. Said he was a great guy, very nice, but the ad, even though ostensibly it was for Liberty Bank, it sounded like it was for Vidlers, because he was just walking up and down the aisles and talking about the old 5 and 10 and all the things you could find there, and that was broadcast regionally, so it was in Western New York, in Rochester, I don't know the one as far as Syracuse, but wherever the Liberty Bank stretched to, that's where they showed it. And my mom thought this should be the family Christmas card that year. Apparently from Peter Graves. Nice guy, distinguished, handsome, but Dad put the kibosh on that. And then we started, you all know the Bob and Ed ads. And that really, after the Peter Graves commercial ran, and even though it wasn't ours, Dad and Uncle Bob said, maybe this TV, there's something to that. Maybe we should do our own commercials. So they didn't start until the mid-'80s, but they were corny, they were cheesy, they were hokey, and everybody remembers them. And people still remember them. They come and ask about Bob and Ed, how are the boys doing, how are the brothers doing. And when I first came back, I knew I had a very tough act to follow, because I was in the store just a few weeks. It was in the summer, and it was literally a quiet weekday morning, and the proverbial little old lady, and she was little, and she came up to me and very quietly whispers, "Excuse me, is there a fiddler here today?" And I look around, and, yeah, I'm a fiddler. And I swear to God, she steps back and the once over, "I don't mean you, I mean Bob or Ed." Very loud voice for everybody heard. So I sheepishly walked away, "Dad, this lady's getting into me." But so the Bob and Ed ads, and that was one of the Halloween ads. And it was funny because if you knew my dad and Uncle Bob, Dad was a talker. He would talk your ear off. He'd go on. Uncle Bob was very reticent and quiet for the most part. But in the ads, he always did the talking and was a straight man. And Dad never said a word. I said, "Dad, you know, before you go, you got to do one ad where you just blabber the whole commercial because no one ever heard him speak during the ads." It was the Easter ad. He had no problem putting on the paraphernalia, the costumes. And Beverly came. Now, my cousin Cliff, some of you know Cliff DeFlyer, he's actually been in the store longer than me and Bev. He came in '85, and he's still there today. So Cliff and I are the third generation of the family there. Beverly, believe it or not, retired almost 6 years ago. But she came back in '90, and I only came back 15 years ago. But we've got the third generation there. And then we started getting in the '90s, we got some great national publicity. Out of the blue, Martha Stewart magazine, I think she still publishes that Martha Stewart magazine, I'm not sure. But they called up and said, "We're going to do a story about crafting and where you can get the materials of crafting. We're going to go to a bunch of concrete stores, 5 and 10s. And their advanced person came to our store and took one look and said, "We don't have to go anywhere else. We're going to do the whole thing here." So again, this was kind of like the Liberty Bank commercial. This was a story about crafting, but pretty much it sounded like it was all about fiddlers. The whole article talked about fiddlers. There were a lot of pictures. And then a few years later, Business Week, which I don't think is even in existence anymore, that's a national publication. They did a story about the store. Now, full disclosure here, the reporter, the article, was done by Kathy Arns, who was my sister's best childhood friend growing up. She does mention it in there. But the thing that I love about this, it's a great article. Yeah, I think we're okay, it's still working. You probably can't see it if you're sitting, but they have a little map. So this is Business Week, national magazine, business magazine. If you can see it, they show where East Shore is. They show Lake Erie, and then the lake above us, near Rochester, is labeled Lake Superior. And I said to Kathy, "Don't you have fact checkers, editors, that you can't find out the Great Lakes, which is which?" So we gave her a hard time about that. But again, just being in those, we got calls on people were calling from all around the country because they saw, "Where's the store? How do we get there?" We probably still today get a call a month from someone from New York City, from Manhattan, asking how long a drive is it to get there. It's about 7 hours. I mean, as much as a lot of us think New York starts from Albany on down, New York and Manhattan, they think upstate New York is from the Bronx up. So that's Bev and Cliff and I at the Candy Counter. That was several years ago. But again, that third generation, now Cliff and I there. All right, here's a trivia question. Which of these stars has not been in the store? Bill knows all of these. Okay, I'll tell you that George Clooney has not been to Fiddlers. The next one, Pierce Brosnan, has not been, but Renee Russo, next to him, she has been in the store. Jim Neighbors, Gomer Pyle, he actually came several times. He had a sister who lived in Buffalo, and he would come up to visit her, and he came out to Fiddlers a few times. I don't know if you're a fan of the Law and Order shows. I think this was Law and Order Criminal Minds. That's Catherine Irby was the lieutenant. She was the second in command. The lead guy was a very intense guy that always would analyze their minds, but she was his co-star. And she also had a connection to Buffalo. I think her family lived here, but she came in a few times a few summers ago. Kids are going to a summer camp out here. Katharine Hepburn did come to the store in the 40s. First she went to Twisty Reed's liquor store at the Circle. And then she came up to the store. Ned Beatty, next to her with a boater hat on, he's been in there. James Whitmore, folks in East Aurora, I know his sister lived in East Aurora, so he would come to visit her. And that's Boss Hog, I forget his name, Sorrell Brooks. We don't know why, but he came in. And then Bev was very excited. About 20 years ago, they had a Munchkin convention in Buffalo, and some of the Munchkins came to the store in full costume. So that was a big draw. And then, anyone know who this is? This is our 6 degrees of separation from Desperate Housewives, Mad Men, and Broadway. That's Christine Estabrook. She's from East Aurora. She grew up down the street from me, graduated a few years ahead of me. But she was the nosy neighbor that got killed in Desperate Housewives, I think the first season. She was in Mad Men for a while. She played the mother of one of the characters. She's been on Broadway in some pretty big shows, and she lives in East Aurora now. But she's a very accomplished actress, both in theater and on TV and screen. And for the youngsters, if you ever hear the show Catfish on MTV, these are the stars of Catfish, Nev and Max. They came about 5 years ago, and they were, I don't know why, the catfishing victim was somewhere in Western New York, and they wanted to come to the store, so they came in. Fiddler on the Roof, I know you know about it, people ask about it. It was put in actually 2009. It is very large, it's very heavy, and it does look like Dad pretty much down to his sneakers. And I know he called me at the time and said, I'm thinking of getting a, just for fun, always people call me the Fiddler on the Roof, I'm going to put a statue up on the store. And I envisioned a little 6-foot statue in the very top corner. And he sent the blueprints, and I said, Dad, this thing is humongous. Oh, they're going to love it. But they went through the zoning board, everything got approved, it was all done properly. But the day they put it in, it weighs about 450 pounds. It's polyresin. And Eric Zimmerman, who runs Visual Impact, if anybody knows him, he's the one who did it. He also did the Lake Effect Man downtown on Pearl Street that looks like a beer pool. He's done the Scotty Dog out of the dog bar, so he's done some of these big signs. But yeah, it's been up there since. It's popular. We get tons of people take pictures of it. Little kids wave to Mr. Fiddler when they're on the school bus. I get calls and people yell at me if I don't have the Halloween mask on or the Santa Claus hat. I got to do that soon, so I've got to decorate it for the seasons. They're kind of old. About 15 years ago, we did a whole series of YouTube videos, and they were just silly, funny infomercials about weird stuff we have in the store. But they were very popular. I think we made about 50 of them. And we've added more, not necessarily specifically for YouTube, but we've added more over the years. Those are some of our big hits. I think the biggest one we had was Turned Down for What. It was a big hit song about 5 years ago. The original lyrics and video are horribly raunchy, so we did our cleaned up, family-friendly version of this, which is very nice, and I think we had like 80,000 views of that one. Recognize Steve Tasker? I called his wife Sarah, and this went out 10 years ago. At one time she was involved with it, but she worked at Elm Street Bakery, and I talked to her one morning and I was thinking, I said, does Steve Tasker, pro football player guy, any habits you wouldn't associate, any hobbies? And she looked at me and smiled, and she goes, yeah, he's a really good knitter. I said, you gotta be kidding me. So right away I talked with her guy and said, we should do a thing with it. And I called up Steve, and I said, I'm not gonna pay you. We didn't, but would you do the video? He said, love to, because they come in the store. So that was one of our funniest videos that we did, and he had a ball doing it. I had a ball because that's his helmet from the last game he played in. And I don't know if you guys remember, but his last game, and I think on the second half kickoff, he got all jazzed up and hit somebody, and the referee gave him a flag, and they threw him out of the game for his final game because he was screaming at the ref. But that's the helmet he wore. Remember about 10 years ago, there was a national contest. It was called Small Business Big Game to get a free 30-second commercial for the Super Bowl. It was put on by Intuit, QuickBooks. So I sent in the initial application, didn't hear anything, and they said there were 15,000 small businesses across the country. About a month later, they called me and said, you've gone on to the next level. And I said, what's next? They said, we'll call and let you know. And about a month after that, they called and said, you're in the top 10. They flew me out to California. It was a huge production. We met Oprah Winfrey. She was a spokesperson. I should say we didn't meet her. They said, you're going to meet Oprah. They put us behind a cordon-off line. Oprah went by, waved at us. That was our meeting with Oprah Winfrey. Counted. The guy who was very nice who was also there was, if you watch Shark Tank, Robert, the Canadian entrepreneur, really friendly guy, really nice. But that was amazing how much publicity we got. That was in the Wall Street Journal. We made the top 10. Then out there I found out we made the final 3. So we got into the final 3 for a 30-second spot. And at that time, Super Bowl commercials were like $3 million for a 30-second commercial. Today I think they're up to like 5 or 6 or more. But it was a big deal for any small business. We were to get that. So they had a national voting contest, basically online voting. And the last, we didn't win, we came in second. The guys that won were Death Wish Coffee, who were on the left. And they're actually from upstate New York, near Saratoga Springs. Really nice guys, I was glad they won. The third guys, the guys from Chubby's, was a guy's clothing store. Didn't like them. Very obnoxious, they thought they had it wrapped up. So the guys from Death Wish Coffee won, which is great. Over the last few years, we continue to get local accolades. Actually, for the last 3 years, we've been named the best toy store in Western New York by the Buffalo Evening News. They do an annual contest. We've been named the best gift shop the last couple of years, so it's nice to get those publications that honor us, recognize us. This was just this past spring. New York State recognized as a historic business, so now we're in the New York State Historic Business Registry. And it has to do, yeah, you have to be in business at least 50 years, but also just that you contributed to the community, you've been a part of the community at that time. I'd like to think we have been. The movies, oh yeah, can't forget those. Another one coming out this year. We've now been in 8 different Christmas movies. Everybody calls them the Hallmark movies. Technically, they've never been on Hallmark. I think that's just like Tissue or Band-Aid. It's Hallmark's a generic name, but they're on the ION Network, the Great American Family Network. They've been on Lifetime. And we've either been in them partially or the front of the store. They've done scenes inside. Any store's obviously been in the Roycroft and Western New York scenes. So those are the first 4. That's the year they originally came out. And those are the next ones. And the last one on the lower right, that's the newest one. That'll be premiering in December. And so those are 8 movies. And that's the same thing. You get a lot of people coming in from out of town. They want to see the town where they're filmed. They want to see the store where the scenes were. So that's been good for us. We get a lot of bridal parties every summer. I love the ones on the lower right because they had the perfect color scheme. They got the red and white ones. But they film the bride and groom. If they grew up in East Aurora, they come in and take a picture on Sandy riding the horse. So we're fine with that. And again, I'd like to think because we're part of the community and that's where they grew up and they enjoy coming in there. Carolcade? Is anyone, you been to the Carolcade? Well, okay. That started like 1968 or 9. And my dad actually at that time, it was just one little pack of Girl Scouts. They came up to the store one day, or during Christmas season in the evening, and they said, can we sing some carols in front of the store? And Dad said, sure. They sang, he gave them a box of candy. The next year he put a little tiny ad in the advertiser and said, any caroling group that comes up to the store and sings will give you a box of candy. A few more came that year, a few more the next year. And then in 1972 or 3, he got in touch with other merchants on Main Street and said, let's make this more of a village-wide everything. And that's really, it amazed me. So it's gone from like a dozen Girl Scouts to a few years ago, it was a really nice night. There's probably 4,000 people on Main Street singing carols. And it really, it's a nice event. Yeah, it's very Norman Rockwell and Courier and Ives, but it's a nice night. Everyone's a great time. And as long as the weather's nice, we'll get crowds like that. And by nice, the perfect night for Carolcade, it was like 25 and a light flurry. Wonderful. The worst night it was 35 and raining, but even then, a couple of years ago, yeah, they just had a lousy weather, but 500 or 600 people showed up. But on the semi-good nights, reasonably good nights, we'll get several thousand easily. This year it's on December 21st, so always the last Saturday before Christmas, as long as it's not Christmas Eve. And I'd be remiss without talking about our employees. They're terrific. It's what sets us apart from the big box stores and going to the big chains. We've got wonderful service. Most of them have been with us for a very long time. They know where things are. They know how they work. And I tell people a lot of times the inmates running the asylum there. Cliff and I just unlock the doors and try to stay out of the way. But we do have a good group of employees. And it was to us, it was nice. After COVID, everyone came back. We lost only one person, and they had some health issues. They said they didn't want to take a chance. But everybody else, as soon as they could, they came back. So that was great. And this, if you can read it, I'll read it to you. It's right when Granddad opened, and I think it was in the paper, but his quote, I think, kind of stands the test of time, 94 years later. That last paragraph says, Mr. and Mrs. Vidler know most of the people personally. They will enjoy serving them as friends and neighbors rather than mere patrons, and will extend little personal attentions and services which shoppers have a right to expect. The fare 5 to 10 invites you to call. And I mean, it's just same principles today, really. I joke around and tell people at times the store is kind of like Floyd's Barber Shop and the Andy Griffith Show. Everyone's coming in for rumor control. What's happening? What's going in here? What's going in there? but that's one of the things I enjoy. I see friends and family and college classmates and high school classmates, and it's not a hard place to work, most of the time. I zipped through that pretty fast. Anybody have questions about anything? Family, store? Yes?
I was living in Florida when they did that advertising. Throughout the country, you said.
Oh, okay.
And I got all excited because my son lived up here. And Vidler's there in South Florida. I got a big kick out of it. I didn't realize it was nationwide.
Our reach is global.
They know about it, South Florida.
Do you have any Vidlers following you and your cousin?
Oh.
Like your kids?
Oh, you mean in the family?
Yeah.
Not yet. There's no one in the family right now that has expressed a desire to work Saturdays and 6 days a week and unload trucks. Yeah, it's retail, so that's part of it. But my kids, I have 2 grown daughters. They're out of town. Cliff's kids are grown, so we've got some time left yet, Cliff and I. I laugh because I did the math. Dad and Uncle Bob were there about 130 years combined. The Ad and Bev, they're there about 165 years combined. Cliff and I have only been in 90 years combined, so everyone calls us the kids.
What's the name of the movie that's coming?
This one, let me look. I think it's, I have to go back. It's that last one. It is called A Royal Christmas Ballet. And everyone in the room knows that we could all write the plots to these movies. The unknown prince comes to the U.S. because he's troubled and he meets a local small town girl and they have a falling out and get back together. But they're incredibly popular. We had a couple last summer that drove from Maine, from way up near Acadia, and they came in and said they came down simply because they wanted to see the store in the town where the Christmas movies are made. And they had a great time. They were not disappointed. Yes?
Do you have any exciting plans for the future that you want to share with us?
I just want to get through Christmas. We have no expansion plan, or people ask us that. Years ago, my dad told me someone from Arcade wanted, you should franchise, you should come to our town. And he looked into it, the more he thought about it, I said, they'd expect a duplicate of our store. They want the wooden floors, they want the same, and he said, we just couldn't do that. So he never thought, and we have enough to handle with where we are now. Because now, well, I never mentioned it, we went from Granddad to 2 aisles on 900 square feet. Today it's 4 connected buildings, 2 levels. It's about 16,000 square feet of retail space. And then we don't have much storage, so usually every day when trucks are coming in and freight, we're just taking off the trucks and putting it out. So we've got plenty to handle with that. But yeah, I wish I had something more exciting to tell you. Yes, sir, in the back.
Yes, so I've seen your dad and your uncle's commercials. They were great. But you've done a lot of commercials, and they've been fantastic. Do you have like a background, maybe when you were younger, where you have some experience with commercials, or?
I was a lead in the Parkdale Avenue 3rd grade production. Yes, Bill, I'm glad you asked that. If you remember back in the early 80s, you are looking at the original real person spokesperson for Slim Fast diet products. So before Tommy Lasorda, I was in a 30-second spot that ran nationally, and I was working in Manhattan at the time, but that was just a fluke how I got it. But anyhow, I made more money that year with residuals than I did working at my real job. But it was fun. If you go online, I'm sure you can find it. 1982 Slim Fast. Yes?
It's wonderful to see that your store has survived all these big box stores. I'm a descendant of S.S. Kresge, shoestring, but it's nice to see that you survived and you're still thriving.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate your support.
And honestly, we owe it to the people here, the people, not just East Store, but all of Western New York, because they've really supported us. And it's, every day someone will come to the store, they'll walk down the aisle, and it works both ways. They'll pick up something and say, I can get this at Walmart for 49 cents less. The next person will come down, oh my gosh, this is the best thing, I can't get this anywhere else. So if customers complain about pricing nowadays, I can't compete with that. I mean, if someone really desperate, it's all they care about is the price, they can go online somewhere and probably find it less than us. But sometimes we're pleasantly surprised. We carry merchandise that's better price than the big box stores. And that gets back to being fair. We don't mark up things crazy, we mark them up which we think is a fair margin, and we don't gouge people on that, and I think people appreciate that. And I think they appreciate the customer service too with our employees. Yes, sir.
I really appreciate the fact that you recognize veterans and give a little discount. There's only 1% of the population now that serves in the military, and those of us that have are dwindling,
Yeah.
to say the least. So, and you have a store that is truly unique, which is just fun to go there and shop.
Yeah.
Which men are not used to shopping.
Well, we do say now, if guys are looking bored, I say we have the men's daycare center behind us, 42 North Brewing Company, is 100 yards from our back door. But thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, that for what it's, the Veterans Discount is a good year round with us. We don't do it just on Veterans Day or Memorial Day. And we appreciate your service, thank you. Yes?
How old is the riding pony?
Sandy is 60 years old this spring. Yep, still works, still runs very well, still only a dime, still a long ride. And I was the first kid to ride it. And now this shows how my dad thinks. He sold my mother, the horse was new when they got it, and said, let's head down, we'll ride it first just in case something goes wrong. So I was a guinea pig. He didn't want a customer to get bucked off Sandy, but his son was okay. So but I was the first kid on it. Unfortunately, the popcorn machine hasn't been functioning for like 4 years almost. We had it during COVID and people didn't really know, but the health department said, it's not the most sanitary thing, and kids are always sticking their hand up the chute. So we took it out, and then when we brought it back, it just didn't work well, and you can't get parts for it anymore. The popcorn machine's also like 60 years old, and that we have it in our history window now. One thing coming up that's fun, actually someone asked, just different, before Thanksgiving, our windows in front will be decorated. There's a local collector in Orchard Park who has all the props and materials from the Dr. Seuss movie with Jim Carrey, and he put them in the windows last year. I mean, these are the real, they're not reproductions, they're from the movie. So we'll have the Grinch on the window and Cindy Lou Who and all the crazy furniture and stuff. So that'll be up in all 4 front windows in the next couple of weeks. And he has the Grinch sled from the movie too, which is really humongous. It's like 20 feet tall or so. And if the weather's nice, we'll have that out in the back of the parking lot so the kids can see that. Yes?
Do you have any apartments upstairs?
Yeah, there's 2 rental apartments above the main store. There's one over what we call the card shop. And we've had those for years.
Really?
I think we have one more question back there.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
That was my schoolmate.
Class of 74, shout out for EA.
I'll have to tell them that's confused. But I want to know how you do your inventory, because you have so many little things everywhere. What's your inventory process?
Very slow. We say one of our ads we say we have over 75,000 different items, which little exaggeration, probably not much. If you count up every SKU and color and size and shape. We actually start right after January 1st, I mean January 2nd or 3rd. And a couple things. Number one, hopefully we've had a successful Christmas season, so there's not that much to count. Number two, if you're in West New York, early January, it's dead in terms of shopping because Christmas is over, if the weather's crummy, so it's pretty quiet. It takes us about a week, but we still do it manually. Every department has a spiral notebook, and they just mark down, you got 10 spatulas and 27 yo-yos, and you just go through and we total it up. I'm sure if the Harvard Business School ever did a study of our store, they'd be horrified at how we do stuff. And some of the things we do, Granddad did it that way 80 years ago.
And we just had one more question in the back.
One more question in the back, Peg?
Oh, I have so many comments to make and stories to tell. But I think of your dad, and you all are master merchandisers. And your dad would go tell the story of going to New York to the toy fair, and he had to anticipate what would sell. And one time, he brought back the Beanie Babies.
Yeah.
And you could not get through the store because that was the big thing. But he anticipated that. And wow, it was a big hit.
Yeah, I remember with the Beanie Baby, that's a good example too. I think we were selling them for $5.99, and we were happy. I mean, that was what we should have gotten for it. Other stores around here were selling for $19, $20 because they were people wanted them so badly. And one day, people thought we had a delivery truck coming in, and they knew it was coming with Beanie Babies. And we had a line off the loading dock. We were just selling them off the loading dock because people wanted them so quickly. But again, we were getting a fair price, a fair margin. We weren't going crazy. But yeah, my mother said to my dad, you could have got way more of those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Don. Enjoy your weekend and go Bills.